Do you ever feel like you're putting in the practice, but your ear just isn't getting better? Today, I'm going to break down why these plateaus happen, how to spot when you're stuck, and the exact steps to help you get moving again. So stick around, you'll leave with a realistic plan for how you can actually overcome some of these obstacles. My name is Kevin Yor. We're talking about this process that happens today where you're putting in the work, you're practicing every day, and you just don't feel like you're seeing results. So, this is something that happens to everybody. This is something that happens to me, my students. It happens to all musicians at some point. It's this spot where you're showing up, you're putting in the work, but it feels like nothing's changing. It's very frustrating. And if you're there right now, you're not alone and there's nothing broken about your process. We just need to reframe how you're approaching that process. So let's get into why this happens, how to tell when you're stuck, and what you can actually do about it. Before we do that, let's just talk quickly about what a plateau is. So it's when your progress just sort of stalls out. You might be practicing every day. Maybe you're working on ear training, audiation, music theory, or even just learning a new piece. But it feels like you've hit a wall. Like I said, I've been there. We've all been there. It's a normal part of the process, but it's something that with the right tips and strategies, you can move past. So, why do plateaus even happen in the first place? So, here's the deal. Plateaus usually show up when your brain is busy processing new skills under the surface. Sometimes you're actually improving, but it's not obvious yet. Other times you might be in a rut because you're doing the same exercises over and over again. And that can actually be a good thing. Doing the same exercises over and over again when they're intentional and part of a longer process and strategy can actually be really effective because it lays a very firm foundation in your brain. And then when something new gets added, all of a sudden, that's when you see the results. So you may be thinking, oh, I'm not getting better by just doing the same thing over and over again, but you actually are. But at some point, you do need to add something new. That's why I'm so careful in the Flawless course where there is repetition. One of the students is taking Unit 2, actually commented on this on YouTube. It said something along the lines of, I love this lesson because it was different. So when you get to Unit 2, there's a lot of repetition. We are pathway building. We're laying the pathways in your brain so that you can really learn the skills that I'm trying to teach at that moment in time. But then after a certain amount of time, you need something different. So don't think that if you're doing something overly repetitive, that it's too repetitive and that it's boring. If you want the fastest results, and by fast I don't mean like you'll get a great ear in a week, that kind of stuff. Don't even listen to that because it's not going to happen. I'm talking about the fastest results you can get that last. The results where you develop a skill and it doesn't go away. If you want those types of results, sometimes we do have to do some of this boring repetition, but you just get in and you get out. So sometimes you're actually improving, but it's not obvious yet. Other times you might be in a rut because you are doing the same exercise over and over again, and there's no exit strategy. You always have to have an exit strategy planned, and you have to know how often to do these repetitive exercises. That's really important as well. Other times your mind's actually checked out. You're too passive. I always talk about active versus passive ear training and active versus passive exercises. I believe you need both. I believe you need something that's really easy for you to complete consistently. And then you also need exercises that challenge the brain. So you're constantly pushing forward. The passive ones reinforce skills that are fairly easy. The active ones build new skills. When you do them together, it becomes very powerful. But if you feel like you checked out, that's something to pay attention to as well. So you need to kind of look at what's going on in your life. Are you too tired? Are you not getting enough sleep? Are you doing things that prevent your body from operating in an optimal fashion? All these things can affect your progress. Or maybe just life gets in the way. You're too busy and your motivation has dipped. That happens. One of the reasons that I do post so much content that's motivational is because that is the biggest barrier to success here. If you lose your motivation, you quit. And so, especially with some of these courses I've created, they're intense. They require a lot of work. They require a lot of mental effort. And sometimes it can be hard to push through. It's one of the biggest things that people cite for their inability to complete a college program, one of my courses, or any new skill that they want to learn. They don't have the motivation to do it. So, first of all, I don't think you really need motivation. I think what you need is this mentality that whether you're motivated or not, you can still do something. You can still get up and you can do the work. Every day I wake up and I just work. I'm not necessarily motivated to do it, but sometimes the motivation comes once I start. Other times the motivation is never there, but you still push through because it's something you know you need to do to achieve the result you want. So maybe the motivation there is that you want to achieve a particular result. And so you just push through things. So, you may not know you're on a plateau. A plateau is actually a good thing, but there's a few things that you can look for. If you're bored or frustrated with whatever practice you're working on, that's a good sign that maybe you've hit a plateau. You don't hear any improvement at all, even though you're putting in the time. There's something wrong with your technique that needs to be trouble. We need to start doing some troubleshooting. You start doubting yourself or the process. If you are working on something that initially gave great results, but then it kind of tapered off, that's pretty normal. When you start working on a new skill, you tend to see results pretty quickly. But then as you get deeper into that skill, you get acclimated to that sort of level of result. You don't notice the improvements because they're incremental, they're happening daily, and now you're in the process. You're within the midst of this skill you're developing. It's not new anymore. So when something's brand new, we can tell there's been progress. We can tell that we've improved. But once you have that initial surge of newness, it becomes more boring. It becomes less obvious that you're improving, but you are. So the trick is to just keep going, but also to be very careful and make sure that whatever routine you're working on is providing enough challenge to keep you moving forward. Because if you just play the same C major scale every day, let's say you go in and you're a pianist and you're trying to learn the C major scale in 2 octaves, you go up, you go down, and you never change the tempo, or you change the tempo too fast. You try and push your ability before you're ready to. All these things can actually get in the way of you finding the improvement that you really want. So you need to have a fine line between not enough challenge and too much challenge. You need to find the middle ground. So it's always important to do that. So let's just talk a little bit about what you can do to break out of your plateaus. Okay, the most obvious one that I do in the Flawless course, is we change up the routine. Every now and then, you'll see that the exercises change, even if they change just slightly. So if you're always doing the same ear training drills, try something different. If you're doing the Flawless course, it's kind of built in, the change is built in. Just start going through the lessons. If they're easy, don't spend a lot of time trying to get a perfect score. Keep going until you get a lesson that changes it. This will help motivate you and it'll help push your success a little further. Don't skip any lessons because every lesson in there matters. But go ahead and just take one lesson a day until you reach a lesson that truly is challenging and is interesting to you again. Because otherwise, you're going to get bored, you're going to quit. You don't want to do that. So it's better to push forward and find a place that challenges yourself than to quit. Because if you quit, what happens here? Remember that newness I was talking about? Where when you first learn a new skill, something seems very new, it's very exciting. You can clearly see the difference in your technique. If you reach a point where you can no longer tell, sometimes you need to keep pushing forward until you see a new challenge that allows you to move past that. So if you're taking the Flawless course, don't stop. Keep trying to do one lesson a day. But what you can do is you can add something to it. Use one of the daily dictations that I have. try and do a dictation. If you always do the dictations in the same way, try and get creative and come up with a new way to do dictations. Try and memorize the dictation first before putting it to paper. And don't write anything down until you've actually memorized it. And you can just sit here, close your eyes, and hear the dictation clearly in your mind. That's one way to do it. So sometimes a tiny shift is all it takes to help you keep moving forward. But remember, when that newness wears off, you're not going to see the results as clearly. It's that leap in ability that we pay the most attention to. And then if we don't see that every single week, then we can get frustrated. We can lose motivation because we will end up saying, well, it was great at first, but didn't really give me the same kind of high each time. And that's what this is coming down to. Anytime you do something repetitively, it becomes easy, the newness wears off. I think it's important to realize that the brain desires constant stimuli. It desires new things. It craves things that are different. It's always looking for something new. If you were to go and have a piece of cake, the first piece of cake might taste amazing. The next piece might still be pretty good, but it's not as amazing as the first one. And then the third piece, maybe it's not tasting so great anymore, but you keep eating it, trying to get that initial surge. Practicing is a little bit the same way. When you first attempt a new skill and you realize that, hey, I have this new perception I didn't have before, that's very exciting. And so you keep practicing in an effort to reclaim that initial excitement. But it rarely happens that way because once you have started training a particular skill, there's a massive leap up in the beginning and then it gradually increases. It doesn't suddenly keep bounding up each time that you go back and practice. It's always just a little bit incrementally better. But then there will be points in time where you gather enough background information that your brain says, oh, I really understand this, and then you'll leap up again. So the goal is to keep you motivated during those times when it just feels like you have plateaued. But chances are you haven't plateaued. You are just getting ready for the next leap in inspiration, understanding, or expertise. So if you keep that in mind, that can help with your motivation. Just know that these results don't come every single day or every week. It's not clockwork. You have to put in the time and you have to deal with the slow moments to be able to experience the high moments. So another thing you can do is you can set micro goals. Shrink your targets. I'm a big fan of this. Instead of trying to memorize 5 tones in a row, for example, aim for just 2 or 3 and be happy with that. So on day 1, let's say you're doing dictations. You can't do the whole dictation. You can't memorize a whole dictation. It's 8 measures long, let's say, and there's a lot of notes. It's a complicated dictation. It doesn't even follow a melody you can remember. It's angular. It's going all over the place. It's built out of only perfect fifths and fourths, so there's no real melodic content. It's easy to memorize because maybe even the tonal center is gone. You don't start by trying to memorize that whole thing and feel like you're a failure if you can't. What you do is you try and memorize 1 or 2 notes, and then you see if you can add a third, and then a fourth, and a fifth. And if you're doing this on your own, maybe you do it with a simple melody. If you're doing it as part of the flawless course, you don't worry about it. You get to the dictation, you get 2 notes, great, you got 2 notes today. Go on to the next lesson, try and get 3 notes that time. If you don't get 3, you're still at 2, fine, try for 3 the next day. And then once you get 3, go for 4. You see how this works? You don't have to have perfection. You just have to constantly push yourself. That is why the flawless course works for all levels. Because if you're a beginner, you only have to get 1 or 2 notes. If you're advanced, really advanced, and great musical memory, get the whole thing. There are exercises that are designed to be approached at different levels. So don't worry if you're not at that high level. Just do what you can. You're going to get the improvement that you're looking for. I also think it's really important to reflect on your progress. Keep a quick journal or even just a voice memo. Just the action of saying to yourself, this is what I did today. This is what was challenging. This is what was easier, or it all felt the same. Just making a note of that can help you stay motivated because it forces you to think back over a session and actually think about what you just accomplished. I'm actually doing this in the composing hour, my inner ear training course, where we develop audiation. Over the course of 3 years, you actually end up learning everything you need for counterpoint and format analysis. It's kind of an integrated course, but what I do is I ask students at the end of each session to think back over things that were challenging, things that were easy, any improvements they've noticed. And I ask these focused questions. It helps with motivation, it helps you stay focused because you're not just completing an exercise and focusing on, well, that was more monotony. That was a plateau. I'm still not getting any better. You're forcing yourself to think about specific exercises and how they may have changed each time you approach them. So I think that's really important to be able to reflect on your progress. The other thing is to kind of embrace the slow burn. That's really what I'm talking about through this whole thing. Growth isn't always going to be visible in the moment. Sometimes after weeks of feeling stuck, you'll suddenly get a breakthrough. It's very common. That's with most things in life. If you feel stuck, just keep going. I think Winston Churchill may have been incorrectly attributed to saying this, but there was a quote that's often attributed to him. If you're going through hell, keep going. I've always liked that because it's true. If you're having difficulty with something, just keep going. You'll find your way out eventually. So just trust that all this work you're putting in is adding up. You're putting coins in the bank, maybe only a penny each day. Maybe you put in a penny one day and two the next, but eventually all that money you've been putting in daily, it adds up. It compounds. It becomes worth a lot more than you thought it was. So you can't always see progress when it's happening. It's not that you're experiencing a plateau. It's that you just don't see the progress. And it's hard for you to see the progress. If you start losing weight and you look in the mirror every day, you don't notice it. Other people tend to notice it first, people that don't see you every single day. They'll see the change more drastically, but you see the same person every day, and maybe you're not seeing the results of your work. Ear training, practice, so many things in life are like this. We don't see our results because we live with ourselves. We have to go through this training every day, and we don't see the buildup as it's happening. But other people can see it, and other people will notice it. If you've been practicing ear training for a few weeks diligently, you go in and start performing. At some point, somebody might say, "Hey, you sounded really good," or your tone is improved or your intonation is improved. Something about your musicianship has changed. I can't quite put my finger on it. Other people will notice. So, another thing you can do is get feedback. Ask a teacher or a friend to listen to you perform and give you some perspective. For ear training, have check-ins with a friend and say, "Hey, I just kind of want to have you test me and see if you think I'm improving." Things like that. You can test yourself that way. This is why it's also useful just to take private lessons. I mean, I create all these courses so you can go at your own pace, mostly because musicians, composers, a lot of them really do want to practice on their own. They're just like, "Give me the information and I'll do what I want with it." And they don't really want to have to stay committed to one particular instructor. But taking lessons, whether it's ear training or composition, that can really help you because then you get somebody who is not you. You meet once a week, once every other week, and they can actually see your progress and they can find issues that you're having difficulty with, and you'll get better progress. So, I mean, yeah, you can take these courses that I offer, and I recommend you do. But if you really want to get the most benefit, I do also offer lessons for anything that I teach. Composition is my main thing, but I have people who are taking ear training. I have people who are taking music theory. People are trying to pass entrance exams. People who are trying to teach a particular course in college and they want a little more information. They want some practice. They want some extra education before they have to do that. I do all of that. And so I find it's really important to have somebody that you can be accountable to if you're having trouble with motivation. Because if you're trying to do this on your own, then it might take another person in your life to be able to hold you accountable at first before you can actually go and have that kind of insight. And knowledge that if you just keep going, you will break through. That's really important. So there's a mind shift that is happening here. Plateaus are not failures, they're expected. It's absolutely where you need to be. They're a sign you're pushing your boundaries. They really are. You may think, well, how's a plateau a sign that I'm pushing my boundary? I'm not getting any better. You are. You are at a point where you have achieved something that is difficult for you. Okay, so a lot of people say in the flawless course, they immediately get this new perception. But then at some point, they will find kind of their balance where this is at the edge of their comfort zone, but they don't realize it because they keep doing the same thing every day and they're not getting extreme results like they did in the beginning. It's like that way with everything. If you're a professional basketball player, at first you're going to get better every week. And then at some point, that improvement's going to be slow because you've hit the edge of your ability, your natural ability, and you just need to keep going because another breakthrough is waiting for you, especially when it's still when we're talking about the mind. When we're talking about physical activities, those can have limitations that are more severe, but the mind can continually improve and improve in really amazing ways. So when things feel tough or slow, that usually means you're right at the edge of your comfort zone and current ability. So it's hard to push past your ability. You are actually changing who you are as a person by breaking through that plateau. How do you break through it? Consistency. You don't give up. It's a reason why so many people don't complete things because it becomes boring. If it's not constantly entertaining, you lose interest. And then what happens is, we used to call them dilettantes, right? They're kind of a master of, well, they're not really a master of anything, but they know a lot of different things. So, well, what I'm getting at here is that the plateau is where the real growth is actually happening. You just won't notice it right away. So don't worry too much about it. So maybe I'll tell you kind of a little personal story. I've had a lot of students who were ready to quit because they felt stuck. They felt, well, I don't know if this is improving. And I would always just say, okay, give yourself 30 days. If in 30 days you can't do whatever exercise I give them, if you haven't improved on it, then maybe you can reconsider quitting. And they never end up quitting because what happens is if they're consistent and they practice that exercise, even if it's just that they come to a lesson with me and I force them to practice it, we do it together, they will see that they got better at it. And usually what happens is, along with mentoring and coaching and all that, they realize that they have developed this skill that they didn't have before. And then it, like a light bulb clicks, it turns on because you realize that if I just put time into something, I will get better at it. You can't not get better if you put time into something. So what often happens is after that initial 30 days, because they're focusing on one thing, they suddenly have a breakthrough and they make more progress in a week than they had in months. And then it plateaus again. You see, this is normal. Sometimes you even get worse. And so I have a theory about getting worse. When you notice you're actually getting worse, keep going. Make sure you're following the technique of whatever you're doing properly. But when you start to get worse at something, that may be a sign, in my opinion, that you're actually going back and filling in some gap, something that you skipped over. Before you can get to the next level, it's like the mind, the brain, whatever you want to think of it as, it has to go back and it has to pick up the pieces that it skipped because it's incomplete and you can't get to the next level until you fill in that foundation. Otherwise, the whole structure falls. And so the brain doesn't let you move on until you're ready to move on. It's kind of really interesting how it works. So if you're in that spot right now, trust me, you're not alone and you're not done growing. You have more growth to do. We always have more growth to, to see. So I've seen this cycle play out over and over again. And that's the one thing that somebody who's a little bit older has an advantage over somebody who's younger. If you're young, you may understand this. You may realize that if I practice something, I'll get better. But what you're missing is a longer context. And I've just seen this play out so many times over and over again. It's kind of old hat to me at this point. I just know that if the student quits, they're probably not going to find success in any other program. If they keep going and they keep pushing through, they will find the success they're looking for. And I know this because I've experienced it. And when you get older, you tend to take a more casual view of it because you're like, well, it doesn't matter. You don't have to rush. Rushing won't solve anything because if you rush, guess what? Eventually you have to go back down and pick up the missing pieces before you can go back up. So it's better to take your time on that hike, slowly climbing the mountain, get as much as you can from each little peak that you get along the way, and then you don't have to go back and pick up the missing pieces. You just know that you're going to constantly improve. So, what I'm saying here, plateaus are a pain. Nobody's going to question that, you know, but they're also a sign you're putting in the work. So, you can do some things, mix things up, set small goals, and remember, progress is always happening, even if you don't recognize it, even when you can't see it. If you've busted through a plateau recently, I'd be very curious for you to share that. Like let other people hear your story. That helps a lot. If you want to help other people, just post a comment. Let them know what particular issue you've had. I mean, I remember even teaching middle school. I used to teach at Wildcat Secondary School. They were a school affiliated with the University of Arizona, and the idea was to help students who normally were of low income get into a college program and make it through the entire school sequence, because a lot of them would drop out when they're 16, when they're legally allowed to. And I remember plenty of stories where, I taught sixth graders how to compose music, which is something that I had trouble teaching college students to do. But when you work with people and you push them and you show them the way, they're going to take advantage of the information you're giving them. And I had another student, I remember she said, I've been trying to understand the piano for years and I finally understand it. So it's not that I helped her understand it, it's that she had that information already in there. I just gave her enough daily practice and daily attention to that instrument, which she thought she had a plateau on. And then she was allowed to go to the next level because finally she had a breakthrough. So don't get frustrated. Just keep going. And this is why I say pick a program and see it through to the end. If you're really not seeing any results, you'll know. If there's a program where you can tell the creator did not put a lot of time into it, a lot of effort into it, you'll know. And you should seek out something that seems a little more sincere. But as long as you're in a program that is sincere, that the creator really believes in, like I believe in my courses, I do believe that they work. I spend a lot of time thinking about each lesson and I make sure that they're gradual and step by step. So if you're in a course like that, just keep going because the plateau is a challenge. There's a difference here. If you're in a course that's just so easy and it never gets hard, that's not going to help you. But if you're in a course where you're at the same level and you can't get past that level, there's a challenging exercise, maybe one, maybe two, maybe all of them. That is a course that you should be in. Plateaus are what make you better. So don't worry about that. Just keep moving forward, and I will see you next time. We'll talk more about this in the future.